What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be having a very deep look at bullet penetration in Black Ops 4 multiplayer. This is something I've put off for quite a long time because it's the kind of thing where you just assume that nothing really changes from previous years, but it turns out things actually have changed fairly noticeably within Black Ops 4 when it comes to bullet penetration. So today we're going to be looking at the different forms of cover, as well as bullet penetration through this cover, and also the FMJ attachments and how these have an impact on bullet penetration values. So first up, let's cover the different types of surfaces that are in Call of Duty. Traditionally, we would have several different types of cover. We'd have light cover, which is usually like plywood or sheet metal, like really thin walls that could really easily be penetrated by most of the guns in the game, even without FMJ or the equivalent in that game. Then we'd have medium cover, and these are sort of like the standard walls that you would see in most buildings where they're not super thick by any means, and you can shoot through them just fine with like assault rifles and LMGs, or if you had like FMJ equipped on an SMG, you could penetrate that. After that, we would have heavy cover, and this would be classified as generally like a really thick wall or like a steel wall of some sort that technically you still can penetrate with like an LMG with FMJ, but you're generally not going to be dealing too much damage through it. It's just technically your bullets can get through. And then after that, we would just have surfaces that could not be penetrated no matter what. Now, like I said, that's traditionally what we would see within Call of Duty, but in Black Ops 4, it appears that we really only have two types of surfaces that can be realistically penetrated with guns. Based on my testing, it seems to basically just be broken down between light cover and medium cover. And a lot of the things that would be considered heavy cover in previous games, you simply can't penetrate them, even with FMJ2 equipped on an LMG like the Titan. It's also interesting to note in Black Ops 4 that there's a bunch of areas that would traditionally be considered light cover that are actually medium cover within Black Ops 4. So overall, it does appear that bullet penetration has been nerfed like across the board in Black Ops 4 when you compare it to previous Call of Duty games. But just to get really in depth with things here, I did some testing on different surfaces using the Rampart because that's something that apparently the pros have been using quite a bit with both of the FMJ attachments equipped on it, and they've been using that because it's really good at penetrating surfaces. So I wanted to test the Rampart. I also wanted to test the Titan, which is more so for public matches, but it's very common that people will be using the Titan with both FMJs. Also the Cordite, just so we can throw an SMG in the mix there, and I believe that's the only SMG that you can use both of the FMJ attachments on. And finally the Paladin, which we also have access to FMJ2 with. So I'm going to take you guys through my testing really quick. Keep in mind this is a bit of a simplified version. Technically, if you're firing at different angles on walls in certain situations, you will be dealing either more or less damage through that wall. But generally speaking, I tried to just keep things head on unless it was something really worth noting, and I just picked two surfaces to keep things simple. On firing range in the wood building, those wooden walls are considered light cover. And then on gridlock, I wanted to use these areas here where the sinks are and the mirrors, because this is actually considered medium cover. Even though it might look like you can't even shoot through it because it's so thick, this is technically medium cover in this game. So let's go in order from closest range to longest range weapons. With the Cordite against light cover, if you have no FMJ attachment on there, you can't penetrate light cover. Although there are some weird situations where sometimes a bullet somehow gets through and does like 3 damage, but for all intents and purposes, SMGs simply don't penetrate light cover. When we put one FMJ attachment on the Cordite, we can now deal 22 damage through light cover, keeping in mind that our standard damage at this range, assuming we're not shooting through cover, is 32. This means we get approximately a 30% reduction to our damage. As for FMJ2 on the Cordite versus light cover, we will now deal 27 damage instead of 22, and this is now more like a 15% loss in your damage, rather than a 30% loss. As for medium cover with the Cordite, with no attachments, you can't penetrate medium cover. Obviously, if you can't penetrate light cover, you can't penetrate medium cover. And also, it turns out, even with one FMJ attachment, you still can't penetrate medium cover. This just leaves us with FMJ2, and with this, we deal a flat 24 damage through medium cover, regardless of the angle. So this means in these situations, you lose about 25% of your damage. Moving on to the Rampart, which keep in mind, at this range, will deal 40 damage, assuming you're not shooting through cover. With no attachments, you'll only be dealing 13 damage through light cover, which is only about 32% of the damage you'd be dealing if you weren't shooting through that cover. When we add just one of the FMJ attachments, we actually double the amount of damage we're able to deal through light cover, and we now deal 27 damage, which is a very significant increase. This leaves us with FMJ2, and with FMJ2 on the Rampart against light cover, we will be able to deal 34 damage through light cover, which means, once again, we're only losing about 15% of our damage while shooting through light cover with both of the FMJs equipped. As for the Rampart against medium cover, with no attachments, we're not able to penetrate medium cover at all, which did surprise me a little bit because normally assault rifles would be able to barely penetrate that, but it simply doesn't. With FMJ1 versus medium cover on the Rampart, we can deal 22 damage through that cover, which is still a very significant loss in the amount of damage that you would be dealing, but at least you're dealing some damage through that cover. And finally for the Rampart, this leaves us with FMJ2 versus medium cover, and with this we will be dealing a flat 26 damage through that medium cover, which is a little bit better, but still you're clearly going to be losing some damage through medium cover. Moving on to the Titan, without attachments we can penetrate light cover, but we're only dealing 20 damage, and keep in mind the base damage at this range for the Titan is 38 damage, so it does hold up better than the Rampart as you'd expect, but you're still losing a very significant amount of your damage. As for FMJ1, we can now deal 30 damage through light cover, which is a very noticeable increase in the amount of damage that you're dealing, and it is quite effective through light cover even with just one FMJ attachment. But finally, we have FMJ2 versus light cover on the Titan, and this will allow you to deal 33 damage, which really isn't that much of a boost over the 30 damage. So when it comes to light cover, FMJ1 and FMJ2 are going to be very similar. This brings us to the medium cover, and surprisingly, the Titan does not penetrate medium cover without the FMJ attachment. This one was very surprising to me because normally LMGs, even without attachments, can penetrate pretty much anything that a bullet is able to penetrate, but not in this case. As for FMJ1, this allows us to deal 26 damage through medium cover, which is still respectable, although you are losing a decent amount of your damage. And finally, with FMJ2 versus medium cover, regardless of the angle, it appears we will deal 30 damage to our enemies, which means we retain about 78% of our damage, which is pretty solid. So finally, let's move on to the Paladin, which keep in mind, it deals a base 140 damage to the areas that don't get the extra multiplier, so like in the leg for instance, you deal 140 damage. With no attachments through light cover, we will now deal 75 damage with the Paladin, which means it's actually impossible to get a one-shot kill on a full health enemy, even if it's a headshot. As for FMJ1, we will now deal 105 base damage, and what this means is we actually get the same one-shot kill areas, so as long as you're hitting them in what is normally a one-shot kill area, like the upper torso for instance, it will still be a one-shot kill with FMJ1. This leaves us with FMJ2, and with this we deal 120 base damage to the body, which means, once again, as long as you're hitting the area that would have been a one-shot kill without cover, you're still going to be able to get a one-shot kill. And that actually means through light cover, there isn't a difference between FMJ1 and FMJ2 when it comes to getting a one-shot kill on a full health enemy. Moving on to medium cover, the Paladin with no attachments will not penetrate medium cover at all. With FMJ1 versus medium cover, our base damage is reduced all the way down to 50, and what this means is it will be impossible to get a one-shot kill on a full health enemy even if it's a headshot. So finally, this leaves us with FMJ2 versus medium cover, and with this we can deal 75 base damage, which if you remember is the same amount of damage that the Paladin can deal through light cover without attachments, but in this case, for whatever reason, you can get a one-shot headshot, whereas versus light cover with no attachments, you can't get a one-shot headshot. So a little bit strange in that situation, but there you go, that's all the testing that I did, and that took quite a long time to put together with the health of the enemy up in the corner for you guys so you can see exactly what's happening. So I hope you guys appreciated the effort that I put into that because it was very, very time consuming. But hopefully that will help give you guys a better indication of just how effective bullet penetration is in this game, as well as how effective the FMJ1 and FMJ2 attachments are when it comes to bullet penetration. For me personally, I was quite surprised by these results when I started testing. I was initially very surprised at the lack of damage that you deal through cover, especially without FMJ attachments. I thought the guns would be at least a little bit more effective through cover, but they aren't. And also, when it comes to looking at FMJ1 versus FMJ2, if we're only limiting it to bullet penetration, we're not talking about taking out score streaks. For me personally, I don't think it's worth having both of the FMJ attachments. Normally, if you are shooting somebody through cover, you've already dealt some damage to them and they make it behind cover, and therefore you're just trying to finish them off. And in a lot of cases, if you're just dealing with FMJ1 versus FMJ2, you're looking at a difference in about 3 to 4 damage per shot, which in some situations will make the difference, but is it worth that extra point or two if you have to use a wild card on your pick 10 class? I don't know. I think in most cases I would rather be picking a different attachment. Having said that, after seeing these results of my testing, I feel like the FMJ1 attachment at least is a little bit more attractive. I honestly thought that I could deal more damage through surfaces without any attachments equipped whatsoever, especially if I was using an assault rifle or an LMG, but it turns out if you're not using FMJ, you're either not going to be able to penetrate cover at all, or when you do, you're dealing very little damage to the enemy. But of course, I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about the results I found in this video? Were you surprised at the base bullet penetration values and the fact that the weapons in this game don't really have much bullet penetration without the FMJ attachment? Also, what do you guys think about the relationship between FMJ1 and FMJ2 as it relates to bullet penetration? Do you think it is worth using FMJ2 if you're just looking at that aspect of it? Or would you prefer just sticking with FMJ1? Like I said, let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.